On New Year's Eve in Lagos, Zuri stood in front of her sister Amara's shining golden door with a small wrapped gift in her hand and a hopeful smile. She had come with one wish, to make peace after years of silence. But when the door opened, Amara's eyes were cold, her lips curled into a smirk. "You're not welcome here," she said sharply, before turning back to the music, laughter, and clinking glasses inside. Zuri froze, her heart breaking as the sounds of family celebration poured out. Everyone she loved was gathered around the table, but she was left standing in the shadows outside. Amara's rejection wasn't only about that night. It was years of bitterness, jealousy, and unspoken wounds. She had always hated how Zuri dared to dream bigger than their poor beginnings. Yet what Amara didn't know was that Zuri had already risen far beyond what anyone imagined. Just 2 years ago, she was abandoned, mocked, and left to struggle with debts and a child. Through sleepless nights and unshaken courage, she built a tech company in Nairobi that quietly grew into a fortune. That night, as fireworks lit the sky, Zuri walked calmly to her car where her lawyer waited. At midnight, as her family shouted, "Happy New Year," inside, her name was being announced as the new majority shareholder of the very company funding Amara's luxury life. Moments later, Zuri returned, no longer begging for love but owning the power. The girl once rejected at the door was now the one who held the keys. Amara's sharp words at the door were more than a rejection from a party. They were the echo of years filled with envy, grudges, and rivalry that began when the two sisters were still girls. Both had grown up in poverty, sharing hunger, torn clothes, and endless nights of struggle. But where Zuri chose to dream and push forward, Amara held on to bitterness. She never forgave her younger sister for daring to want more, for fighting to rise above the life they were born into. And now, on this glittering New Year's Eve, Amara saw her chance to remind Zuri of her place. With a smirk and those cruel words, she slammed the door not just on her sister, but on years of hope for reconciliation. Inside the mansion, the music swelled. Glasses clinked, laughter filled the air, and Amara lifted her champagne flute high. To family unity, she declared with a wide smile, the irony sharp as a knife. The guests cheered, raising their glasses, while outside the same door, Zuri stood alone in the night, clutching the small gift she had brought with trembling hands. Her chest ached as though her heart had shattered into pieces too small to mend. The sting of exclusion cut deeper than any wound. She was not just shut out of a party, she was shut out of the family she still loved. But what no one in that glittering room knew was that Zuri was no longer the broken, helpless woman they remembered. Just 2 years earlier, she had been left behind with debts choking her, mocked by neighbors, abandoned with a child in her arms. Everyone had written her off, even her own sister. Yet out of the ashes of humiliation, she built something powerful. Quietly, with grit and sleepless nights, she started a small tech company in Nairobi. It began with one rented desk, a borrowed laptop, and sheer determination. Piece by piece, brick by brick, she turned it into an empire worth millions. Zuri had never boasted. She never arrived with noise or tried to prove anything. She wanted peace, not power plays. That was why she came tonight with a gift, not with pride. But Amara's cruelty under the glow of the chandeliers struck a fire inside her. Standing there in the cold night air, she wiped her tears and straightened her back. She was no longer the girl begging for love or respect. She was a woman who had already earned her place, with or without anyone's approval. As Amara laughed inside, toasting to unity, with a smile painted for the crowd, she had no idea that the sister she mocked was carrying a secret that would shake her entire world. Zuri's power was quiet, invisible for now, but it was real. And soon, everyone would see that the woman left crying at the doorstep was, in truth, the strongest person in the room, even if she hadn't stepped inside yet. 2 years before that cold New Year's Eve, Zuri's life was in ruins. She had been abandoned by the man she thought she would spend forever with, left alone with a little child on her hip and a mountain of debts she had no idea how to clear. The neighbors whispered about her failure, some laughed openly, and even her own sister Amara sneered at her misery. People who once shared food with her turned their backs. Everyone thought Zuri was finished, a woman doomed to struggle forever, too weak to rise again. She cried at night, silently, because she had to stay strong for her child. But deep inside, the pain hardened into determination. If no one believed in her, she would believe in herself. With nothing but borrowed money and a second-hand laptop, Zuri began to build. She spent long nights in internet cafes, learning, reading, and sketching ideas while her child slept beside her. She tried, failed, and tried again. The little startup she launched in Nairobi started small. So small that people laughed when she called it a company. But Zuri ignored the voices. Every setback became fuel, every rejection became fire. Slowly, her vision took shape. Clients began to trust her. Investors started to notice her. What once seemed like a foolish dream grew into something powerful. In 2 short years, that tiny company grew into a multi-million-dollar empire. And yet, Zuri never boasted. She did not buy flashy cars to parade through the streets. She did not flaunt her new wealth on social media. She chose peace, simplicity, and quiet strength. She wanted to build a life of dignity for herself and her child, not to prove anyone wrong. She carried her success with humility, believing that love and family mattered more than riches. That was why, on this New Year's Eve, she had come with only a gift in her hand and hope in her heart. She wanted reconciliation, not war. But standing at that golden door, hearing Amara's cruel words, something inside Zuri shifted. All the pain she had buried came rushing back, but this time, it did not crush her, it fueled her. Amara thought she was rejecting a helpless sister, the same girl who once begged for crumbs. She had no idea she was pushing away a woman who now had the power to change her world with a single decision. The cold night air bit at Zuri's skin, but her spirit burned hotter than ever. She looked back at the glowing windows where her family laughed without her, and instead of breaking, she straightened her shoulders. Amara's cruelty had lit a fuse that could no longer be put out. Zuri was no longer ashes. She was fire. And the world that once mocked her was about to feel her heat. Fireworks cracked above Lagos, painting the night sky with bursts of red and gold. People shouted and hugged, the city alive with celebration. But Zuri did not turn her eyes to the sky. She turned her back to her sister's golden door and walked slowly down the steps, her gift still clutched in her hand. Her chest was heavy, but her footsteps were steady. She was not going home in defeat. She was walking toward something far bigger. At the curb waited her car, black and sleek, its tinted windows hiding the people inside. When the door opened, warm light spilled out, and she slid into the leather seat. Waiting for her were not party guests, but her lawyer and 2 of her most trusted allies, the only ones who knew the full truth of who Zuri had become. The air inside the car was quiet, serious, almost electric. While the rest of the city cheered for a new year, Zuri's team sat ready for a new era. A thick envelope lay on the seat between them, holding the final documents. Zuri placed the untouched gift gently on the floor, then picked up the papers. Her hands didn't tremble. She had waited too long, worked too hard, and carried too much to falter now. This night was not about revenge, though anyone watching from the outside might think so. Zuri's heart wasn't burning with hatred. It was burning with the need to reclaim her dignity, to finally stand tall in front of the people who once mocked her, ignored her, and cast her aside. She was not there to punish Amara. She was there to remind herself that she was no longer the desperate girl crying in the dark. She was power, she was grace, and she held everything in her hands. Her lawyer leaned forward, offering her a pen. The sound of fireworks outside grew louder, booming like drums, as though the whole city was keeping time with her decision. Zuri took the pen, glanced at the faces of the people who believed in her, and drew in a slow breath. With one smooth stroke, she signed her name across the paper. That single signature was more powerful than all the laughter, insults, and rejection she had ever endured. That signature shifted control, not just of a company, but of her own story. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the weight of it sink in. No one in the glittering mansion behind her knew what had just happened. No one at the party raising glasses of champagne had any idea that the woman they had laughed at was now holding their future in her hands. The city roared with joy at midnight, but inside that quiet car, Zuri had started her own countdown, one that would change everything forever. And when she finally opened her eyes, there was no trace of pain left in them, only fire. At the exact moment the clock struck 12, the mansion filled with cheers. Music swelled, glasses clinked, and the family shouted in one voice, "Happy New Year!" Hugs and kisses spread through the room, fireworks lit up the sky, and Amara stood tall in the center, smiling like a queen in her palace. She believed she had everything, a wealthy husband, a grand house, and the respect of everyone watching her. She thought this year would begin with her on top, admired and untouchable. But what she did not know was that across the city, in a quiet office, another celebration was taking place. A voice announced Zuri's name, not as a guest or an outsider, but as the new majority shareholder of the very company that funded Amara's glamorous life. The truth was that Zuri had sealed her victory weeks earlier, long before she knocked on that golden door. Silently, without noise or gossip, she had signed deal after deal, buying shares that others ignored, waiting for the right moment. Piece by piece, she gathered control until the company belonged to her. She never bragged about it. She never warned anyone. She wanted the world to discover the truth only when it was too late for Amara to stop it. So while Amara raised her champagne glass and toasted to wealth and family, her security, her comfort, even the very walls around her, were already tied to Zuri's name. Every chandelier, every polished marble floor, every luxury she flaunted came from the company Zuri now owned. Yet Amara remained blind, laughing and posing for pictures, while the ground beneath her feet quietly shifted. In that very moment, Zuri sat back in her sleek car, the documents safely tucked away, her lawyer nodding with quiet satisfaction. She didn't smile out of cruelty, but there was a calm power in her silence. She had not shouted, she had not argued, she had not begged. She had simply moved with patience and precision, and now everything was hers. The world outside exploded with fireworks, but inside the mansion, another kind of explosion was already waiting to happen. The texts and calls would soon start buzzing, the whispers would begin, and Amara's confident smile would slowly falter. She would learn, piece by piece, that the life she built on pride was now under Zuri's control. Zuri had not come for revenge. She came with love, hoping for peace. But since Amara chose pride, Zuri chose strength. And as the cheers of "Happy New Year" echoed in the night, one truth stood taller than the fireworks: the woman who was once mocked, rejected, and cast aside had just become the silent force no one could ignore. Amara thought she had won the night, but the crown she wore was already in Zuri's hands. The party was at its loudest when the first sign of trouble came. Amara's phone buzzed on the marble counter, but she ignored it, laughing loudly as music blasted and guests danced in her living room. Then it buzzed again, and again, until the vibration became impossible to ignore. She picked it up with an annoyed sigh, expecting a simple message. But as her eyes scanned the screen, the color drained from her face. Her bank accounts were suddenly frozen. Another message flashed: key contracts voided. A third came through from her business partner, urgent, panicked, begging for answers. Amara's hand began to tremble, her glass of champagne tilting in her grip. Her husband noticed immediately and pulled her aside, whispering sharply. "Something is wrong. Very wrong." His phone, too, was filling with alerts, each one worse than the last. The empire they flaunted, the money that bought the gold chandeliers, the designer gowns, and even the roof over their heads. It was all unraveling in seconds. Guests nearby began to sense the shift. Whispers spread quickly, laughter dimmed, and the music that had filled the air now felt out of place, like a mask slipping from a face. And then the biggest shock of all arrived. The golden doors, the same ones Amara had shut so coldly in her sister's face, opened once more. But this time, Zuri stepped in. No longer timid, no longer broken, she walked into the room with calm grace. Her head was high, her steps slow but sure, and her presence alone commanded silence. Conversation stopped. Glasses froze midair. Every eye turned to her. The sister they had mocked and rejected had returned, but she was not asking for a seat at their table anymore. She was the table. Amara's breath caught in her throat as her gaze locked with Zuri's. Just moments before, she had laughed at her outside, sure of her power, sure of her place. Now, that same sister stood before her with a confidence Amara could not fake. Zuri didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her very presence was louder than any music or toast. The guests began to whisper, their eyes darting between the panicked couple and the calm woman standing at the door. The shift was undeniable. Zuri let the silence stretch, her face unreadable but her energy undeniable. She had returned not as the outsider begging for love, but as the one holding everything the room valued: power, control, respect. The house, the wealth, the lifestyle Amara had built her pride on were already slipping away, and everyone knew it. The fireworks outside still lit the sky, but inside the mansion, the real explosion had already happened. The celebration was over. The party had crashed to silence, and all of it was because Zuri had walked back in. The music had already faded into uneasy silence when Zuri stepped further into the mansion. Her calm presence filled the room in a way no one expected. Amara stood frozen near the staircase, her champagne glass shaking in her hand, her once confident smirk slipping into fear. Guests who had been laughing only minutes ago now whispered behind their glasses, their eyes darting between the two sisters. They had heard rumors in the past, but tonight, they were watching the truth unfold right in front of them. Zuri's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she walked toward Amara. In her hand was a folded document, crisp and official. She stopped just a few steps away, her face unreadable, her voice calm. Without a single word, she handed the paper over. Amara frowned, confused, but as her eyes fell on the bold letters at the top, her face drained of color. It was an eviction notice. Not just for a house, but for this very mansion. The one she had bragged about, the one she had once told Zuri she would never belong to. The paper trembled in her hands as the weight of it sank in. Gasps spread through the crowd. People leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. How could it be that the woman they mocked was now holding the very deed to Amara's home? The same guests who had joined Amara in her prideful jokes now avoided her eyes. Some even looked at Zuri with new respect, realizing she was not the weak outcast they thought she was, but the strongest person in the room. Amara tried to speak, but her lips quivered. This isn't possible," she stammered, clutching the notice as if it would change by sheer will. Zuri, however, stood tall, her gaze steady. Her voice carried through the room, soft yet firm, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I came with love tonight. I came to make peace. But you chose pride instead of kindness. Now pride will keep you warm." The words hung in the air, sharp and unforgettable. Amara's smirk, once her shield, was gone. All that remained was fear, shame, and the eyes of the people she had wanted to impress now staring at her downfall. Her husband shifted uncomfortably beside her, his face pale with panic. The mansion that had been her crown jewel was no longer hers. Zuri did not stay to watch her sister crumble. She didn't gloat, she didn't raise her voice, and she didn't smile in victory. She simply turned away with the same calm strength she had walked in with. Every eye followed her as she moved toward the door, her dignity unshaken, her power undeniable. Amara was left clutching the eviction notice, her pride shattered in front of everyone. And in that moment, the guests realized something they would never forget: the girl who was once told she would never belong now owned everything that mattered. Amara's voice cracked as she begged, her pride gone, her hands clutching at the eviction notice like it might save her. Tears smudged her makeup, and the guests who once laughed at her side now looked away in shame or whispered behind their hands. The queen of the night had fallen, and nothing could hide it. But Zuri did not gloat. She did not raise her chin in arrogance or spit back the cruel words she had once endured. Instead, she stood tall, her face calm, her eyes steady. She had no need for revenge. She already held the victory, and it was bigger than anything money or power could give her, it was dignity. Zuri turned slowly toward the golden doors, her footsteps echoing through the silent room. Each step was heavy with meaning. She was leaving not because she was defeated, but because she had already won. The mansion, the wealth, the whispers of respect, they were hers if she wanted them. But she no longer needed their approval to feel whole. Outside, fireworks burst across the Lagos sky, painting the night with bright colors. The crowd inside could still hear the crack of explosions, but they all knew the real firework had happened in that living room, when Zuri walked in and turned everything upside down without raising her voice. The girl who had once been told, "You're not welcome here," was now the one no one could ignore. As the golden doors closed softly behind her, it was clear to everyone left inside, the night no longer belonged to Amara. The last laugh of the new year belonged to Zuri.